All right. We are
Okay.
recording.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me on and being my guest for an interview. Thank you so much.
You're quite
Um, I
welcome,
would,
Johnny.
and when I'm so excited to be interviewing you. But I will tell you my story after that. Can you introduce to yourself to the audience, please, of who you are?
Okay. Um, Name is Tom Campbell. I'm a physicist and also a consciousness researcher. Okay, I've written the trilogy, My Big Toe, which is basically a my big picture theory of everything. And the my is there not because I'm so proud of it. It's there because if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. So this My Big Toe is based on my experience, and it's basically a set of 3 books to help people create their own big toe, toe being theory of everything. So you can't have, your experience has to create your own theory, your own understanding of the way the world works. You can look at my theory, and if that helps you develop your own, that's good. But in the end, you can't just believe, or you shouldn't just believe what I say or disbelieve what I say. You need to, you know, develop your own sense of reality and what it's all about based on your own experience. So that's the my big toe means that it's based on my experience. So it's just a place to start for everyone else so that they can start with that understanding and structure if that works for you, if that works for you. If my big toe doesn't work for you, then you should just put it aside and go on your own path. So it's not something to believe or disbelieve. It's just a model of reality, a model of consciousness that also does better physics. I'm a physicist, so this model of consciousness explains the paradoxes that are currently in modern physics today, such as why is speed of light a constant, and why should particles be best described as probability distributions. That's respectively relativity and quantum mechanics that I'm talking about. Those are the 2 big mysteries in science, in modern science anyway, and this theory of consciousness actually explains those problems in physics, those paradoxes in physics. So it's a model of consciousness, which is a model of reality. Consciousness is fundamental. Everything else is virtual. So that's just a very quick jump across the top of who I am. I've been doing this. I've had a career as a physicist for about 40 years, 45 years. I'm retired now. And for about the same amount of time, I've had a career as a consciousness researcher. So I'm one of those odd people that has done both of those at the same time, had 2 careers, one by day, one by night. Uh, so that's an unusual mix, which is, I guess, why what I write tends to be kind of an unusual perspective, because it was a perspective that I gained by doing research, by doing good physics in the realm of consciousness. So that's what basically brought me to the books, which, like I say, is a theory of consciousness and also of everything, of science. So it talks about everything objective and everything subjective. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch on who I am and what I do.
Well, thank you so much for introducing yourself. I've been on this. I've been trying to research about life for like 7 years. I've been trying to understand why this universe is very not what it seems. Like people believe this physical reality to be very corporeal, that there's randomness and chaos, but there's no meaning behind it. That it's just that we humans have no power within the scope of the universe. People think that people view human being as powerless. So back in, I wrote in an email why I wanted to interview you. Back in when I was in boarding school, there was this guy. Um, he he gave me an email. I didn't really look. I gave him an email. I didn't really look into it, right? And so back in 2011 to 2012 and 13, I went through a phase of my life where I broke up with my ex, and that everything just shattered. And I started questioning about life. I was lost. I wanted to die because, like, dreaming was better than reality. And this thing that I felt was like hopeless until I not travel, but the understanding of basic reality was weird. Like 2013, where I call it the window shatter, meaning the illusion, the glass that people see is just, it's weird. Like, it opened my eyes that there was more to reality. Coincidence start happening. I was introduced into spiritual stuff, law of attraction, and I started to attract these things into my life. And I start reading his email, and I talked to the guy, and he liked your book, Big Toy, and he recommended me to you. And I saw your video on double slit, and then I interviewed Robert Bruce, was kindly recommend you, and I talk about astral projection because I think I experienced astral projection too. And so that led me to interviewing other people and trying to understand what this reality is. It's so weird.
Well,
And
that sounds like a good path to be on. Are you finding answers?
yes, I finally answered that this reality is nothing but an illusion that people made up. It's like these ideas are just bullshit. I'm sorry. It's my, like, I think that the Matrix is the perfect example that people are being in the dream world where they haven't woke up. So I woke up.
Mm-hmm.
So can you explain that the nature of reality? What is this really? What reality is this really?
Okay. You can come at this from two directions. So let me start from the direction of science. Back in the early 1900s, from about 1915 to about 1925, so almost 100 years ago. Well, I guess it will be in the next 5 years. It will all be over 100 years ago. And anyway, we had the birth of quantum mechanics at that time. There was a bunch of very high quality scientists, Schrodinger and Bohr and Heisenberg and Wigner and Einstein, and just this long list of really top, very brilliant scientists. And they invented quantum mechanics from an experiment called the double slit experiment. And this double slit experiment is an experiment that does something impossible, does something that I called it like a minor miracle. And they looked at this experiment and realized that this reality could not be primarily physical, could not primarily be mass and space, that sort of thing, that it was information based. So that was the first idea that science had, that our reality wasn't a physical reality, but was rather an information based reality. And this double slit experiment, what it did is it sent a single particle toward a barrier that had two holes in it, two slits in it. And what they expected, if you throw a particle at a barrier, say a piece of cardboard or something, it's got two little slits in it, and they were throwing little photons at it, little chunks of light. But you can also fire electrons at it, or buckyballs, or hydrogen molecules. Doesn't matter. You throw particles at it, and if you don't look at which slit the particle goes through, the particles, for some unknown reason, distribute themselves on a screen which is behind the slits. So the particles go through the slits and then hit a screen behind the slits. They distribute themselves in a diffraction pattern. That is, in a very specific pattern of stripes of particles separated by stripes of no particles at all. And that was not expected. That's the miracle I'm talking about, the minor miracle, because everybody knew from Newton that a particle travels in a straight line unless it's acted on by an exterior force. That's like Newton's second law. So these particles should have gone through those slits and hit the screen right behind the slit. So you should have had a pile of particles behind each slit, because that's what particles do. They go through the hole, they would just hit on the slit right behind it. But they didn't. They arranged themselves in a diffraction pattern, which was a wave pattern, a pattern that we had seen light interfering with itself produce these diffraction patterns. So that was a big mystery. Why should these particles rearrange themselves in this very particular pattern when there's no forces on them at all? So they looked at this and they studied it and came to the conclusion that this is not a physical reality. It's an information-based reality. And they came to that answer because if they measured the information of which slit a particle went through, so they have a detector at each slit. So one of the particles goes through slit 1, the detector would say, a particle just went through my slit here, slit 1. And if it went through slit 2, the same thing, it would measure that it went through slit 2. If they measured which slit the particle went through, then the particles just piled up in piles behind each slit, like particles should. But if they didn't measure it, then they would distribute themselves in this diffraction pattern on the screen. So they knew that how reality actually played out, be it piles of particles or diffraction patterns, was determined by what information the experimenter had. So our reality was information-based. If we had the information of which way data, which is which slit they went through, then we'd get piles of particles. So that was the beginning of it. But since then, over the last 100 years, there's been literally hundreds and hundreds of experiments that have verified the same thing, that this reality is not physical-based. It's not mass-based, it's information-based. And that now is probably a very large minority of physicists and physics departments and universities all over the world agree that that is the way our reality is. It's information-based. They're still probably in the minority because that's just been growing over the last couple of decades as more and more experiments kept verifying the same idea. So that's probably the biggest new thing going on in physics today, is that physicists are finally coming to the conclusion that this is not a mass-based, but rather an information-based reality. All right, now what does that mean? If it's an information-based reality, that's the same thing as saying it's a computed reality. And that it's a computed reality is the same thing as saying it's a simulation. And that saying it's a simulation is the same thing as saying it's a virtual reality. As you mentioned, just like the Matrix, that was a computed reality. Okay, so that's where science is taking us, to this idea that reality is information-based, that we exist, our bodies exist because they are computed in a computer someplace. Okay, now if you think about what does that mean, that we would live in a virtual reality? Well, if you think of the virtual realities that you may have heard of, like The Sims or World of Warcraft or No Man's Sky or any of the virtual reality multiplayer games that are available. There's lots of them available. Those are the ones I know, because those were the ones my kids played when they were young. And
Well, I do know about they do have, like, because I watch anime, Japanese cartoon, so quote, they have this where they go into this world where they hook themselves, and then they go into this virtual reality, but it's very real, like they're themselves, but they can act upon this world. I feel like also dreams, I feel like there's another level of reality, but I
that's
feel
true.
like after waking up from this reality, that there's another level of reality. But
There
go ahead,
is.
you're talking.
Yeah, there is, and that's consciousness. So the question would be, well, where's the computer?
Yeah, yeah.
Where's the
Like,
computer? Yeah, what's the
yeah,
computer? That
yeah.
would
Why
be
does
the.
it exist? Like, that's what in my mind. Like, I'm curious. Why does it exist, and what does it purpose? Like, questioning, we're looking at people view God as, they have heaven and hell, and I've been studying like witchcraft, alchemy, all the religion, and I'm trying to find like they said there, or Hindu, right? Hinduism is very good example to people and reality. But the problem is, where does this end? Who created this thing?
Okay.
Why is
All right. I can answer those questions.
he's like
I can answer those questions for you. All right. So we have that this is a virtual reality, and that's what science tells us, that this is a computed reality. Well, if you think of, let me use World of Warcraft, because that's a game that many people grew up playing. I don't know if it still is. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It's my fault. I have played World of Warcraft, but it's on card. We play Raid, but I know what World of Warcraft,
Yeah.
but not on the game. But go ahead.
Okay. Well, that's World of Warcraft is called a multiplayer game, right? You have lots of players all over the world. People can be playing World of Warcraft, and you can interact with other people who are also playing that game. So it's not just a single player. There's multiple players playing at the same time. So the way that works is that you play an avatar. Say your character is a barbarian or an elf, or a necromancer, or whatever the various kinds of characters are in that game. Then you play that character and you make all the choices for that character. So that character is just information. That character is just computed, right? It's a computed character, computed by the server that serves that game. And you, the player, are that character's consciousness, because that character doesn't do anything if you don't give it direction to do it. So you tell that character, run, fight, dance, jump up and down, go left, go right. You tell it what to do. Otherwise, it just stands there and wobbles if you don't tell it what to do. So you are that character's consciousness. Now, there's two things that we can say about virtual realities. It's true about all virtual realities, and that is the computer and the player have to be in a reality that is non-physical to the virtual reality. In other words, from the elf's perspective, the computer that's computing World of Warcraft can't be inside of World of Warcraft. And the player that's making that avatar's choices is not in that virtual reality, the World of Warcraft, but it has to be outside of that reality. So the computer and the player cannot be in the same reality as the virtual reality that the computer is computing. You see, a virtual reality can't compute itself. So the computer isn't a virtual computer inside there with the elf. The elf can't walk up to the computer that's computing the elf and say, oh, that's the computer that's computing me. The computer that's computing the elf has to be in some other reality frame, and it has to be apparent, and it has to be non-physical from the viewpoint of the elf. So from the elf's perspective, the consciousness that's playing the elf, the consciousness that tells the elf what to do and when to do it, has to be outside of that virtual reality of World of Warcraft. And the computer computing that virtual reality, computing the World of Warcraft, has to be outside of its own computation of that virtual reality. Okay, so that is just the nature of all virtual reality. So now what we have is a virtual reality of characters called avatars. So your elf is an avatar, and you're the player. You play that elf. You log on, that's your elf, and you make all that elf's choices for it. You, the player, are non-physical from that elf's point of view. If the elf had a point of view, it's just an avatar. But if the elf had a point of view, you would be non-physical, and the computer would be non-physical as well. So now we are in the same situation. We're in a virtual reality. Okay, so now our bodies are avatars. So this body here is just an avatar that's computed, because this is a computed reality. Our consciousness is the player. Our consciousness is what's making me talk. It's what's choosing these words. It's all the choices I make, whether I touch myself on the shoulder. All those choices are made by the consciousness. And this body is just like the elf. It's computed. Okay, so also we know that the consciousness and the computer have to be outside of, have to be non-physical to this virtual reality where this body is. The player can't be in this virtual reality, and the computer can't be in this virtual reality. So that means that there is, well, let's say one other thing. The player and the computer have to be in the same reality because they are interacting with each other. The player tells the computer, oh, I want my elf to jump. So the computer then draws a picture of the elf jumping and the consequences of the elf jumping and sends that back to the player who sees his elf jump. And that's how the game is played. Okay, so my consciousness is the player, and the computer then is also in consciousness. So there's a thing what I call the larger consciousness system, which is just all of consciousness. And that system takes a part of itself, and that part acts as the computer, because consciousness is an information system. And it takes another part of itself, and that part is the player playing this character called Tom Campbell. So that is then the idea that this is a virtual reality. Our bodies, our physical world is computed, it's information based, it's a virtual reality, and we are consciousness logged on to a particular avatar to make that avatar's choices. So that's kind of the way the reality works. And now you ask, well, what's the reason? What's the point? Why would a virtual reality be made? And why would consciousness be playing and so on? Well, there's a good answer to that as well. And that is that this larger consciousness system evolved from the most basic form of consciousness available, was just a self-awareness of two states, this way or that way, you know, hot, cold, acid, base, 1, 0, whatever, just a binary. It could tell one state from another state. And it then evolved. It evolved so that it could tell, you know, multiple states, or it could stack the 1s and 0s in series patterns. So it could make patterns of 1s and 0s. And it evolved. So consciousness evolved to higher, well, shall we put it this way, to lower states of entropy. Now, I just added a new word. So what's entropy? Entropy is a word, comes out of physics and thermodynamics, which is a measure of disorder. So if you have a computer, if you have an information system, and all the bits in the information system are random, then there is no information, because it's all chaos, all random, no information. If you take some of those bits and order them in, say, a pattern, now you've created information. For example, if you just have a string of 1s and 0s, if I go 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, what's next? Well, it'll be 1, 1, because 1, 1 follows the 0, 0. So there's information in the pattern. So that lowers entropy. Now that you have a pattern of 1s and 0s, the system's entropy is less. It's got structure, okay? It's got form. It's not all random anymore. It's a series of double 1s and double 0s. So that lowers its entropy, and that defines information. Okay, whenever there's order amongst the random bits, that order defines information. So consciousness is an information system, and it evolves by lowering its entropy, creating more information and more useful information. So this information system evolved with patterns and patterns of patterns, that it could give symbols to those patterns. It could let those patterns mean something to itself. But in any case, eventually its growth got slower and slower, because it had just about made all the patterns of patterns of patterns that it could think of, and it got kind of slowed down in its entropy reduction. So it discovered regular time. Now, time had always existed, but regular time is consistent time, you know, tick tock, that sort of thing. And once you have regular time, now you can have sequences. sequences of patterns, of sequences of patterns, of patterns. You see, it gets a whole new dimension in which the system can evolve. So then it evolved with times and sequences and patterns until that started to slow down its development. And it really wasn't growing very much anymore. It wasn't been able to lower its entropy a whole lot, kind of reached the ceiling, what it could do with that. So what it did is it split off a piece of itself to interact with. So now instead of just one monolithic thing, you had two things interacting. You see, our biology did the same thing. Our biology started out all as single-celled things, but that's very limited. You can't do but so much with just single cells. So then those single cells split and became multiple cell things. And those multiple cell things now were a lot more survivable and much better able to procreate. And so they went on because that's a more order. That multi-celled thing has more order, therefore more information. So that's a lower entropy configuration of the cells. So this did the same thing. So it created pieces of itself. Now, consciousness to exist has to have free will. Without free will, there are no choices. So we're talking about a system that can make choices, that can choose 1, 1, 0, 0, or 1, 0, 1, 0, or whatever. Those are all choices. So consciousness has to make choices. It has to be able to choose from among the things that are available to it to do. So now there were two things that both had free will that were interacting, and the amount of possibilities suddenly grew. So then it made more of those things, and now there's hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of little chunks of consciousness that can all interact with each other with free will. And suddenly there was almost no end to the possibilities of how that could further organize itself into something lower entropy. So you see, consciousness has two choices. It can evolve, which means lowering its entropy, or it can de-evolve, which means raising its entropy. And if it de-evolves, it dies. The system's no longer an information system if it keeps raising its entropy until all the bits are random. Then there is no more information. So the information doesn't exist anymore. So now we have a consciousness system with a purpose, with a goal, and that is to evolve, to continue to live, continue to survive, and decrease its entropy. But even with all these individuated units of consciousness, it's like a great big chat room. What consciousness does is communicate with each other. They interact. And think of that as like a huge chat room, and the only rules are the rules that define communication protocols. Well, that's kind of slow. There's not a lot of consequences to any of the choices. Yeah, there's lots of choices about what you're going to send and receive to other chunks of consciousness, but there's very little consequence to any of it. So the system realized that if it was going to continue to evolve, it needed an environment in which there were more consequences, more choices that really made a difference, choices that were significant and important. That way, the system could evolve much more quickly through those choices. So the system evolves by making good choices. So the system creates a virtual reality with a rule set that defines all the tiny interactions that can happen inside this virtual reality. It defines all the rules. Okay, what are the rules in our rule set? Well, it's what we call science. Our science, chemistry and physics and biology, their job is to dig out the rules in the rule set of this virtual reality. So the rules are science. So it took a rule set and some initial conditions and punched the run button and let this thing just evolve. Let those initial conditions change according to the rule set and just see what happens. Because evolution is really a fractal process. It's what I call a process fractal, where you take the output, in other words, you have those initial conditions, the rule set then changes them because it says, oh, according to the rules, those initial conditions would change like this. And then it takes that output and feeds it back in as an input. Oh, now that it changed like this, now the rule set has more possibilities. It applies it. So it's just, you keep reapplying the same rule set, but every time you apply it, the things change, and then you put the input back into the output. So that defines that defines a process fractal that we call evolution. So this virtual reality was created as a entropy reduction trainer for us, which is individuated units of consciousness. So here we are, you and I, each an individuated unit of consciousness, just a chunk of consciousness, and we've logged on to this game, this multiplayer game. You've logged on as Johnny, I've logged on as Tom, and we're both playing our avatars, and we have choices to make. And those choices have a lot of consequences. When we make choices, our choices affect everybody else, and everybody else's choices affect us. And the choices are serious choices, like, you know, how to find enough food to eat, you know, shelter, job, you know, reproduction, spouse, wife, children, how do you take care of them, and so on. So there's lots of choices. A lot of them are life and death choices. So that's why we're here. That answers your question of who are we? Well, really, we're consciousness. We're individuated units of consciousness, not bodies. Why are we here? Because we've enrolled in this virtual reality game, this entropy reduction trainer, in order to evolve our consciousness more quickly. And another way of saying evolve our consciousness, say evolve a higher quality of consciousness or a lower entropy consciousness. And there's only one other thing that I need to tell you that will then put all the things together, and that is if you take two separate groups of individuals, individuated units of consciousness, and let's say we'll put 10,000 in each group. So this is going to be a little thought experiment. So we have group A and group B, and these two groups will be identical. They all have the same potential, the same kinds of individuals, and so on. They should be identical. But we're going to let one of the group interact through caring, cooperation, trying to be helpful to each other, sharing, and that's one group. Let's say that's group A. Group B, they will interact through fear, which means they're very self-focused. They have their needs, they want to get their needs met, and if they have to use other people to do that, well, that's okay. You know, it's not their problem. So you have these two groups. One I call the love-based group, that's group A, and the fear-based group, that's group B. So if you give each one of these groups the same amount of resources, the same amount of stuff with which they can work, and then just watch and see how they evolve. Well, the love group that is trying to be cooperative and helpful and caring, it's about other, not about self, they will eventually optimize the resources for everyone. There will be a social system where in everyone's existence, everyone's choices, everyone's free will is optimized. Where if you take the fear group, well, the way that works is that because they're very self-focused with the fear, if you have a lot of fear, you don't have much trust. If you fear things, then you don't trust other people because they may take your stuff. And what you'd really like to do is take their stuff. So if you have a fear group, there's no trust. And without trust, it's kind of everybody for themselves, except eventually the individuals will group up together in like a mutual defense pact. So, you know, say 5 or 10 or 20 of these individuals will have a mutual defense agreement. So they'll all, if anyone gets attacked, then they'll all go to that one's defense. So you have these defense groups, and these defense groups then are more powerful than just individuals. So they can go out and take stuff away from individuals, and they can get a whole lot more of the resources for themselves just by taking it away from others. So others form up groups like that too. So now you have a bunch of independent groups that are all kind of grouped up in mutual defense pacts to protect their own members, and they generally attack each other trying to take the stuff that the others have. And that goes on to evolve to where just a few people are kind of, what should we say, a few people own all the resources and have all the power, and everybody else is sort of a peasant, because those kinds of defense pacts have to be hierarchical. Who's in charge and who serves who? And has to be a hierarchical structure in those pacts. So you end up with hierarchy with a few people at the top controlling everything else. And that structure is what we live with here and have been living with here on this planet forever. You know, that's the warlord, you know, philosophy, right? You got a whole bunch of warlords, and each one of them are, you know, trying to get as much power as possible, as many people as possible, so that they can keep other warlords from taking their stuff, and so they can take the stuff that other warlords have. So it's just who's biggest, who's strongest, and whoever's strongest gets to take what they want. So
Cool.
that has been the human condition for the last 200,000 years that humans have been walking the, you know, the planet. That's basically been the way we are. So we live in that fear-based group. But anyway, what that tells you is that lowering entropy, which one of those is a high and which one's low entropy? Well, it's obvious. The group based on love, caring, that's a low entropy group because it builds, it constructs, it organizes, it shares. If somebody in that group comes up with a good idea, well, he shares it with everybody. So everybody can benefit from that good idea. Whereas in the fear group, if somebody comes up with a good idea, they keep it to themselves because why should they give that away? They can sell it. They can share, you know, they can share it at a price, or they can use it to make themselves more powerful compared to some other group. So you see in the love group, you have a low entropy optimization. In the fear group, it's very high entropy. In the fear group, if anybody builds up something and creates some or constructs something, well, somebody else is going to tear it down, either out of envy or just because somebody else would like to own that stuff. So they'll grab it and take it over. So it's just a matter of warlords, you know, trying to, you know, do each other in. It's a very high entropy situation. So if you look at those two, you'll see what it means to be in the love group is that you care about others. That's the point. That's the low entropy solution. So consciousness, with all of its individuated units of consciousness, is a social group. And in a social group, you minimize entropy or maximize your evolution by caring, by loving, by being helpful and cooperative. So that tells us, what are we here for? We are here in this entropy reduction trainer to lower our entropy. And how do we do that? We make choices that help us grow up to become more love, help us to care about others, to cooperate, to be, you know, to think about what can I give rather than what can I take. So that's why we're here, to make those kinds of moral choices. And by those choices that we make as consciousness playing this avatar, we either evolve or de-evolve the quality of our consciousness. If we de-evolve, then our entropy goes up. And if we keep de-evolving, it goes up. And pretty soon we're nothing left but random bits. You see, we get so dysfunctional that we become pretty useless even to ourselves. On the other hand, if we make choices on the side of becoming love, caring, and cooperation, then we keep lowering our entropy and lowering our entropy. So that answers the question, why are we here? Why is this virtual reality here? To give us a learning lab, a schoolhouse, if you like, that helps us evolve more efficiently. Who are we? We're consciousness. And what does that relate? How does this physical reality relate to that? Well, the physical reality is a virtual reality, and our bodies are just computed. That's what the scientists found out when they found out that this is an information-based reality. You see, consciousness is an information-based system. What are you conscious of? You're conscious of what your sense data gives you. It's just information. So you take information in through your senses, and that defines your reality. If you took away all that information defining your reality would cease to exist. All it would be is that, you know, I exist. It's sort of the Descartes moment. You know, I think, therefore I am. You would just be a point of consciousness floating in a black void. That's all you would be. You'd have no place to interact. There'd be no choices to make. You just exist as a point of consciousness. So consciousness, your ability to make choices, is just about information. Taking information, that information defines your reality. So now we'll take it one more step. Who are you? You are a piece of consciousness, and you are getting an information stream, a data stream from the computer. The computer is also a piece of consciousness, configured to be a computer. It's an information system, so it can configure itself as a computer as well. So you get this information system, and that information system defines your reality. You get a data stream that you interpret that data based on your past experience and your knowledge and your fear, and that interpretation becomes your reality. So that's kind of the picture. Now, that means everybody's reality is a little different. I live in a different reality than you live in. We all share certain things. We all, well, at least now we're at least sharing some electronic devices so we can make this video together. You being where you are and I'm being where I am, we can do that. So we're sharing, they're shared things, but internally, our realities are different. That's because our experiences are different. The way we think are different. So you live in your reality, I live in my reality, and we both live in a shared reality. And we both can make choices that affect each other. So we made choices to meet at a particular time and place and have this talk over Zoom. And that was because we cooperated, and that allowed us to do this. You see, so this is kind of a creation, a thing we're making because we cooperated with each other to make it happen, and because we had the tools. So that is now that's just the bare bones. There's thousands of logical consequences to this that I haven't explored, but that's the bare bones of who are you, why are you here, and what's your nature. Well, think of it, your consciousness, you're immortal. You're not mortal. When you die, your consciousness just goes on. It's just your avatar dying. When you're playing an elf in World of Warcraft and your elf dies, well, it doesn't affect you any. You're the player. You're the consciousness. You just go get another elf or bring that one back from the dead, however the rule set, whatever the rule set supports. So you as consciousness are immortal. And because becoming love is a difficult thing, you play more than one avatar. You're going to play this avatar and you'll try to learn what you can learn, and then you'll take lessons learned from this experience and go have another experience. Play some other avatar. So our life is a series of these experiences in which we play different avatars in order to make choices, in order to grow up, become love, and thereby evolve rather than de-evolve. I should say evolve and survive rather than de-evolve and die. So that's the overview picture.
Thank you so much for that, Tom. That explained a lot, and I hope that's the reason why I wanted to bring you on and so many guests, is to be able to raise the level of consciousness or awareness about us or about each each individual. People have something within them that can create this, as you said, virtual reality. But also, you are right. We have different experiences that made who you are and made who I am. And I'm trying to, because the thing is, for me, I grew up. I don't. I hate school. That's one thing I have gripe with about the education and the corporate world, that they try to conform you in a way that it's not. That's what I wanted to ask you about, the authentic, about being who you are instead of like. I know that you say cooperation and love. Where's does that tied into being who you are and not be? Because I feel like people are afraid to show who they are. And so for me in special education, I was brought up thinking that I was stupid and dumb. And so that's why I wanted to impact the special education. And so to change the way that the law of attraction thinking, because there's so much more that people could, and that because my pain, it come from my pain from not understanding. I failed so many things. Um, and I try to understand about life and try to bring forth through my YouTube channel that I try to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm asking.
Okay, well, we generally have a lot of fear. You see, our job here is to get rid of fear, right? And when you get rid of all your fear, you are love. That's what's left over. You're just, when it's no longer about you, well, it's about others. So this growing up thing is getting rid of fear. And it is the fear that creates, you being different, you being authentic, being different from you, as your image. Okay, fear is the difference there. Fear is what creates that. So yes, we want to become authentic. We want to be authentic people. And to do that, we have to get rid of our fears. So a lot of our fears have to do with social programming. As you say, a lot of our fears, you fear that maybe you're not good enough, or you're not smart enough, or you're not capable enough, or that you feel inadequate or insecure. And all of these things are fears. And when you have those fears, they make you act in a way that you kind of deny those fears. Well, if you're afraid that you're powerless, then you have two ways of acting. You can be the wallflower that just sits around and doesn't talk to anybody, or you can be the bully who gets out there and, pushes people that, they get in your face, and, you become aggressive. So those are two tactics, or two ways of dealing with feeling insecure and small. You can be brassy and bigger than life and just push your way through life, or you can retreat and be the person that sits off on their sides and is afraid to talk to anybody. But neither one of those is who you really are. You see, you're not really the bully or the brassy push ahead take charge person, and you're not really the wallflower that sits in the corner either. Those are just your reactions to fear. So when you have this fear, that fear drives you to make all sorts of choices that you wouldn't make if you didn't have the fear. So becoming authentic requires us to get rid of the fear and be exactly who we are. Okay, now that could be pretty or not so pretty. We find out exactly who we are. First thing we have to do is accept it. All right, this is me. This is the way I am. I'm like this. Now be it. Don't just think about it, but be who you are, and then look and see how that works. When you're just being who you are, you look at that and say, well, is that working well? Am I having fun? Am I happy? Are my choices, helpful to other people? Am I just a user? How am I doing here? And if it turns out that you're not doing so well, that you have problems with relationships, you're unhappy, you have a lot of negativity, then you have to realize, okay, that may be me, but it's not what I want to be. I want to be different than that. So then you look and see, okay, I tend to take what I want and use people when I'm just being the way I am because I have these fears. Then I don't want to be that way. So then you have this intent, I don't want to be that way. And if you have that strong intent, you won't be that way. You will eventually, over months or maybe years, get rid of those fears that make you act that way. And now, when you're authentic, you're somebody else when you're authentic. You see, because you got rid of a fear and now you're different. So you keep doing the same thing. You keep trying to be authentic who you are, and then you look at what that causes. How does that work? How happy are you? How happy are the people around you? And if you get rid of your fear, your life will become a life of joy, a life of peace. If you have a lot of fear, your life is going to be a life of struggle, a life of constantly battling and constantly struggling with other people. You struggle in your relationships, you struggle at work, you struggle with everything. Life just seems to be difficult all the time. That's because of your fear. When you get rid of that fear, your life is full of joy, it's full of happiness, your relationships are terrific, and everything seems to be just the way it should be. You are a happy person. So that's one of your ways to judge how grown up are you? Well, it depends on how much negativity do you have. All of that stuff that's stress, unhappy, not appreciated, undervalued, I don't know, angry, self-centered, all of that stuff is negative stuff. And as much as that represents your feelings, then you have a lot of growing to do. And as much as the opposite, the joy, the peace, and the happiness represents your feeling, and you're doing pretty well. So be authentic, but then look at what that authentic person is and try to do better. Try to get rid of some fear so that now your authentic person is a happier person, a more fulfilled person. So that's kind of the process. It's a matter of getting rid of fear. You can't be authentic until you get rid of your fear. So one of the ways that you're authentic is to just, or one of the ways on that process toward getting rid of your fear and being authentic is to just be focused in what you do. Be focused in the moment, what you do and why you do it. It's kind of the be here now idea, be present in the moment, which means you're not constantly wandering around in the future or the past. You are living each moment to its fullest and directly and purposefully. Well, that way you get to see what your choices are. When you live in the moment, you can say, all right, I have a choice here. I could do this or I could do that. So which one is the better choice? You think about it a while. You don't have to know for sure which one's the better. You just think about it until you make your best guess. All right, I'm going to do this one. So you do that one, and then you look back and see, how does that work out? Was that a good choice or not such a good choice? So this is something that isn't going to get fixed quickly. You got to live your life. You got to be who you are. You see, the problem with not being here now is that you never, if you're in the past or in the future, you never even notice the choices you're making. The choices, you're going through life like a zombie. You just keep doing what you're doing because that's what you're doing, and you're not really consciously making choices. You're just going with that flow that you're in, and you're living your life like a zombie. So that's why the teachers will tell you to be here now, be present, be focused in the moment. Make sure you know what choices you're making and why you're making those choices. If you do that, you'll become aware of your choices. And if you do that, you can change them. You can get rid of the ones that are dysfunctional and keep the ones that are functional. And whenever you do that, you become a different person. Your entropy goes down, your quality of consciousness goes up, and you're a different person. So eventually that process will take you to where you want to go, to a life full of happiness and satisfaction. So that's that's kind of the way to go. So yes, being present is the first step in becoming authentic. And both of those together will help you get rid of the fear, which is what keeps you from finding happiness with a low entropy, high quality consciousness. Okay, now you mentioned law of attraction a couple of times, and I can mention a little something there. One of the ways this virtual reality works is that we have a feedback here, so that we get to in some ways we get to create our reality. It's a collective creation in some sense, not in every sense, but in some senses we do that. And one of the ways we do it is that we can modify future probability. Now, the future is not done yet. The future can't be predicted exactly, but you can look at a future and say, well, these things are possible. And of all these possibilities, here's the probabilities of each one of those things. This one's more likely and this one's less likely. So there's this database, if you will, of all the things, all the choices that we can make and the probability that we'll make them. That's kind of the future probability database. What will happen? All the possibilities and what the probability is that that thing will happen. And those probabilities change all the time. As we make choices, those choices affect future choices. So all the probabilities keep changing as we do that. Well, you can modify the probability of something happening here just with your intent. So that's what the secret, the law of attraction is based on, is you can modify things with your intent. But now all intents are not equal. If that intent is coming from your intellect, that's called making a wish, and wishes are very low power. They don't change much. Okay, what makes an intent strong and moves future probability is, one, it has to be focused. It means you have to have precisely in mind exactly where you want to go, and where you what you're trying to change the probability on. It has to be very focused. It has to be clear, which means there can be no noise in your mind. If thoughts are constantly streaming through your mind, then that will make your mind, your consciousness, very, very weak. And that's why people generally learn to meditate, to get all those stray thoughts out of their mind, to where they can focus that mind on one thing without other things getting in the way. And the last thing is that it has to be from the being level. It can't come out of your intellect. It has to come out of your core of your being. That's where your emotions are. So that's the key. So there's lots of ways we can change things. That's how mental healing works. You can heal somebody take away their headache or something if you have that intent to get rid of that headache, and if it is clear, if it's focused, and if it comes from the being level with some force behind the intent. Okay, so those are the ingredients. Now, if you don't have any one of those three, then the whole thing doesn't work very well. If it's mainly out of your intellect, not much happens. Or if it's you don't put any oomph behind the feeling, you're not really wanting to do this, you're just kind of pretending at it, then that doesn't work very well. It has to be out of your core. You have to want to do it. It has to be something that you put your energy in. Okay, energy being a metaphor. So that's how you can modify future probability, whether it's healing somebody, healing yourself, finding a parking place when you get to work, getting that new red motorcycle that you want, whatever it is, you can raise the probability of those things happening. You got a picnic in a park next week. Well, you can use your intent to make it more probable that the sun will shine rather than rain when you have that picnic. So that's where that law of attraction comes in. It is a real thing. You do modify future probability. It has nothing to do with programming the universe. It just has to do with the nature of this reality we live in, that we have this feedback mechanism where if you look around you and you look at the world the way it is, that world is that way because we are the way we are. In other words, the world we live in is the way it is because we're the way we are. We humans have a lot of fear, low quality of consciousness. That's why we live in a world that's so full of greed and so full of fear and that sort of thing. If we change, then the system will change. And so you started out when we first started talking about, a lot of people feel powerless in this world. They're just here and they have no power. Well, exactly the opposite's true. We have the most power that can be had. Everybody does. Because if you want to change the world, the way you do that is change yourself. You got to change yourself first. And if enough people change themselves, then the world will change all by itself because that world reflects us. Yes, those nasty corporations and governments and all the rest of the bad guys that everybody, complains about, they represent us. They're just like us. When I say us, I mean humanity. That's the way we are in general. So when we change the way we are in general, those governments and those corporations, they'll change too. And if you go out and force a change, like, take that person out of government and put in somebody else, or get rid of that corporation or that CEO, it's just a Band-Aid. All you're doing is relieving a symptom. That's a symptom of the problem, not the problem. And okay, you get rid of that evil dictator and you put somebody in there who's a nice guy, and 50 years later, nothing's different. Either that nice guy starts to take advantage of people, or he gets bumped off and somebody else comes in and takes over, because unless it represents the people, it's not going to be stable, you see. So you can go out and change things, but they're just symptomatic relief. Now, it's good to have symptomatic relief. We'd like to have fewer symptoms. We'd like to have a kinder, gentler place to live, but realize that that's not going to persist unless we change. We can maybe make a little piece of it kinder and gentler, but that's not going to be stable unless we change. As we don't grow up and get a higher quality of consciousness, those things that we change will go back just to the way they were eventually, because that is what represents us. So not only are we powerful, we're as powerful as it gets. We have the ability to change the world, but we have to do it individually, one at a time. You can't change anybody else. You can only change yourself. So that's your optimal contribution to our culture and our social systems, is to change yourself and grow up. And that is a very big contribution, because as you change, the people around you will change. It's a catching thing. As you grow up, you'll help other people grow up. And as they grow up, they'll help you grow up. So it's a thing that we can do. And some good news is for the first time ever in the history of humanity, we have an opportunity to actually take a big step forward in this growth, become a lot more caring now than we've ever had before, because the world has shrunk. The internet, shrinks the world. So everybody gets to see up close and personal all the horrible things going on, rather than just saying, well, yeah, something's going on way on the other side of the world, but who cares? It doesn't have anything to do with me. Well, now it has to do with you. You get to watch those people in their suffering or whatever's going on. It raises our awareness of how the world's working and what it's like. And that is given us an opportunity to take some big steps in growth. So I'm very positive that within the next several decades, we'll probably see some big steps forward in growth, bigger steps than have been taken since humans crawled out of the trees and started acting like they were human.
Yeah, that's why it kind of hurts me when people do mass shootings and kill other people. That's terrible, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
as you said that we have to come from a place of love and caring. And I think oftentimes, because I've been trying to understand why people do these things to other people, and oftentimes it comes from hurt. You
Mm-hmm.
know, other people have been hurt so much, and that's why I wanted to be kind to people. It's not easy. Oftentimes, when you're kind to people, they kind of you know take away your smile. And I have some moments of those times where I'm kind to other people, but then they they're not as kind, and it breaks my tears. I
Mm-hmm.
try to give my best to them, you know, and stuff happened, and I remember that day. I did everything I can. I just went crying. I was like, why, stuff like that. And uh, generally, Asian people do care for their family and stuff like that. When it comes to the interesting aspect of human beings, people do care for one another. In its core, that's why people try to inspire people and try to do things because they don't want to go through the other people try to push the message where they don't want to get other people to feel that pain again. So because I try to come in order for me to lift people up, I have to relate to them in a way that I can't relate any other way. There are some people who are not like us, but I try to bring like for example, introvert. People are when I was a kid, I was really shy. I didn't know how to talk until I I discovered that my nature is I can be funny. I like to enjoy things. Oftentimes we forget who we really are. As a child, you can see that it's very curious about a lot of things, and we've often forgot about that nature. Why did you become a physicist? That's what I'm curious about.
Why did I become a physicist?
Yeah.
Well, I guess part of it was I wanted to know how things worked. That's just I never liked the idea of things happening, and I had no idea why they happened that way. I wanted to understand how things worked. And I was one of those kids that, at 4 years old, I was taking flashlights apart and other kinds of things just to figure out, how did they work? What were the parts? And how did you make the thing work? So that was one reason. And another reason was that was on my path this time. I came here with some specific things that I had to do and accomplish, and getting a degree in science just happened to be the way I needed to go to gain credibility for the ideas. So I came into this world very right-brained, not like a scientist at all. Right-brained people see big pictures, but they don't do logical process very well. They just can intuit things. They're very intuitive people, and they aren't good at things like math or logic problems or that kind of thing. They don't do that very well, but they seem to get along just the same because they can intuit answers that everybody else has to figure out. They don't really have to figure it out. They just know it. Anyway, I came in like that, very right-brained and very holistic, big pictures of the world. But I knew that I needed to become the opposite. I know that I needed to become left brain. I needed to do science. I needed to get that logic, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to describe how things worked. If I could just do it intuitively, well, I'd know how they work perhaps, but I couldn't explain it to anybody else, and it really wouldn't be helpful to anyone other than myself. So I needed to become a science guy so that I could not only understand things and how they work, but I could explain it to others. So yeah, I started out with physics, and then went on to get master's degree, and then went on to do PhD work, and I did the whole thing. But it wasn't easy because that wasn't me naturally. So I had to work very hard at doing those things. Math was always hard for me until I got, in probably 2/3 of the way through graduate school, and then suddenly it got easy. I saw the big picture of how it all worked, and so on, and then the math got very simple for me. So now I am both. I'm extremely right-brained and intuitive, and extremely left-brained and logical, both at the same time. And I think that that is a good way to be, because the intuitive part and the logical part should work together as a team. And usually they don't work together as a team. One of them dominates the other. That intellect part says, I'm in charge. Intuition, be quiet, sit down. You're unreliable, intuition. You just need to take a back seat and let me run things. That's the way the intellect feels. And on the other side, the right-brainers, they don't see any point in all that logical process when they can just intuit the answer and everything works just fine. They don't need to understand it or explain it. It just works out for them. So that way the right brain controls, and the left brain comes in and says, yeah, but this is related to this and this causes that. And they go, I don't want to know all that stuff. Don't tell me how it works. I don't want to be bothered with that. But then the problem is it only works for them. That intuition isn't valuable. They can't share, they can't teach, they can't help other people see things. So they're just kind of stuck in their own little intuitive world, and not really, it's hard for them to connect to others. So our culture really highly values left brain intellectual process. So if you can do that, then wow, you're valuable, right? And you'll get a job with a good salary if you're good at doing that. On the other hand, if you're right brain and intuitive, you'll get called airhead, and that sort of thing. People make fun of you because you just don't seem to quite have a real tight grasp on anything. You just kind of float through life, but things work out for you, and all the stuff falls at your feet when you need it, and you get along just fine. But we don't value that intuitive very much. So in our culture, being left brain and intellectual and logical is highly valued. So we have a lot of people walking around who are way out of balance. Their intellect dominates them completely, and their intuitive side is either not there at all or very minuscule. They don't pay any attention to it. They don't trust it, and they don't they don't understand it. So either way, being out of balance is dysfunctional. You really need to be balanced and be very right-brained and very left-brained both the time. So the right does the things the right's good at, and the left does the thing the left's good at, and the two of them work together, for a result. And that's a much better way to be. So I did the consciousness research, which was all intuitive for the most part, and then I was doing physics at the same time, which is all logical. So I've been working on both sides for 40 years, and that helped integrate the whole thing in my mind. So I do I do both of those. One's about as strong as the other, so neither one of them dominates.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Like, finally I can bring you on and talk about these things because I learned a lot. Since people talk about because I want to bring people on to connect with the audience and people that they too are have the capability to learn. And I learned through like understanding that you can't in life you can't go to the extreme. I keep finding that I keep going through the middle. Like, I feel like the middle path is like the really right way. Sometimes if people go too far, they take it to the extreme. And I learned that, like as you said, the left and the right need to come together. They call it the whole brain. And
Yeah.
in my mind, school didn't taught me that and let me feel me empty. But after I do research, you probably read. I don't know if you read the guy Tony Bazan. He really is good with understanding the brain. And yes, and when you talk about the right brain and intuition, let's talk about this. When when you were little, did you listen to your intuition? And when you talk about when you listen to your intuition, everything you need will come. That is truly true. It's not. It's like I've seen it because I was watching because I've been trying to. There's this thing talk about flat Earth, right? And people who believe in the flat Earth and they think that everything is a lie. And I've been watching um this was the ISS International Space Station, right? And something weird happened. Uh, I guess I forgot about it, and then somehow I went to shopping, and I bumped into when I finished shopping, I bumped into the former NASA. That's incredible. Like I don't understand. That's still like everything that you need will come. I've seen it over and over again. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm grateful for people. Like people think that people are bad, but in general, they're really good.
Yeah,
Like,
things will happen when you live, when you're in touch with your intuition. Um, you will find there's a thing called synchronicity.
diet.
That means that things just happen just as you need them. There's these synchronicities. You just meet the right person, or you find the right book, or to help you take the next step, that help you understand, or events happen or things happen to you that give you a lesson and let you see what your fears are doing to you. Or anyway, just life comes. If you lose a job, well, another one just kind of falls at your feet, and okay, there's another job, and oh, it's even better than the last one. And if you have this positive attitude, if you have um, a very sunny disposition, okay, now you're thinking positive. If you think positive, you're actually putting energy into those positive things happening, because you are putting energy into modifying the probability that those positive things are going to happen to you. So that's one thing. So you're kind of rearranging your reality so that these positive things occur. And if you're intuitive, you're going to be aware of those possibilities. Intuitively, you'll know that, well, something else will come along. All right, I lost this job, but something will come along, and you're not particularly worried about it. You still stay positive, and that positiveness puts energy into something coming along, and then there it is, and just at the right time. So your whole getting fired really just gave you a 2-week vacation, which was wonderful, and then you got a better job that paid you more, afterwards. Things just work out like that. And I know people will think, well, that's silly. Why would things, you know, fall at your feet that way? But they do, because you become positive and you become aware of the possibilities and the probabilities, because all that is in your intuitive space. All those possibilities and probabilities are all, you're connected to all that intuitively. That data in that database, you get into that database intuitively. So your intuition has that information, and the sense that your positiveness then feeds a good outcome, you make things happen. And the system can also use that in order to help you evolve, help you grow here. So yeah, that intuitive space is a space that deals in information that your intellect never gets to see. It's outside. It deals in an information channel that your intellect is not privy to. And that information channel is really very powerful. You get a lot of information that way.
How? But did you like always listen to your intuition, like when you were little?
Yeah, when I was little, like I said, I was very right-brained then. So my intuition was probably key. I probably listened to the intuition more than I did, the intellect. When I was little, I was very intuitive. You know, my sister reminded me not that long ago of when we would take long trips where the kids, my sister and I had to sit in the back of the car, for maybe 4, 5, 6 hours at a time because parents were taking us on some sort of trip, that I would begin chanting, and I had this little chant that I would do, and it's the chant that I put in my books. When I wrote my books about meditation, I also put a little chant in there. Well, that's what I was doing when I was like 5 years old. I'd sit in the back, go into like a meditation state and chant, and I was totally oblivious. I wasn't there anymore. I wasn't sitting in the back of the car. I was elsewhere. I was in a deep meditation state. And then when the car pulled into wherever we were going, I'd kind of wake up, and it was like a really quick trip. It only took, a few minutes. It's like I got in the car, and then a little while later we were there. So I could just disappear for 5 or 6 hours into mental space just to use up the time. And nobody taught me that. It just was natural. It just happened, just the way I was. So yeah, I was very intuitive as a young kid. It wasn't until later that I knew I had to do science to build the credibility and the understanding to explain things that I started struggling with learning to become left brain. And then being a physicist, you live your life in logical process, and eventually that took over, and I became very strong in the analytical side, as any physicist has to be. It's all about math and logic. And then that became very strong as well. But yes, as a young child, I was quite intuitive.
That's huh, interesting. Yeah, every time I interview, ever since they were little too, but I think that as we grow up, we tend to forget because of the noise that the matrix or whatever the ideas. I feel like the ideas are plastic in a way. It changed, but because for me, I forgot about it because it kicked me out of high school. That was the best day of my life because it changed who I am as a person. But in that process, I had an intuition. I listened to it. It's it's an innate thing with every human being that I interview. It's very fascinating. And when they are in tune with that, they're led into a situation that is for them, or they're in the right place at the right time. And I told people, because I'm trying to, like you said, build credibility. I try to build it so that you can be in the right place at the right time, but if you're not aware of the situation, you can't take the opportunity, whatever that
Right.
may be for you, right? For
Right.
me,
Absolutely. Yeah. When you have that intuition helps you know what the good opportunity is, whether you should take that one or a better one is coming right around the corner. If you pay attention to that intuition, you have knowledge, you have information that doesn't pass through the intellect. It just comes as a knowing. And eventually you begin to rely on that because it works and it's right. And it's not something that, that you can't depend on. It's something you can depend on. And most young children tend to be more intuitive. And then they lose it at around 7, 8 years old. They start to lose it. And by the time they're 10 or 12, it's gone. Now they process everything through their intellect. But some of us, and I was one of them, I kept a lot of that intuitive as I grew up. I was using my mind to modify future probability, when I was 5 or 6 years old. I just knew that that would work. I knew that I could focus on things, and I would practice sitting in the back of the car, making lights turn green just as we got there, so that my father, who was driving, could go through like 10 or 15 traffic lights and never get a red one, because I would sit in the back of the car trying to make the lights turn green at the right time. So I was practicing modifying future probability as a very young child. I just knew that was the way it worked. Nobody taught me. It just was obvious that reality worked that way.
Yeah, ever since when I was little, like I remember I'd say that we do have power, but oftentimes it was like when I was a kid, and people, your family would laugh, but we lost it. That's the incredible thing. Like every time when you do you come into like how did you get into meditation? Like, do you do Tai Chi or how?
No, when I was in graduate school, let's see, somewhere after a master's and before the PhD, in that part of graduate school, I took a course in transcendental meditation. It was only $25 for students. That was a bargain. And the only reason I took it was because it promised that you could get by with less sleep. And as a graduate student, particularly in experimental nuclear, which is what my research was in, you needed to stay up sometime for 2 or 3 days in a row because you'd have we had a big Van de Graaff generator doing low energy nuclear physics. And once that machine was working, you didn't go home, take a night's rest, and come back the next day. While that big thing was working, you kept it working day and night, 24/7. And getting by with less sleep was important to me. So that was my first formal meditation. But I'd always meditated, like I say, from a very small child. I'd always done some sort of meditation. I just didn't call it meditation. It was just me connecting to the inside world. But once I did meditation, I found it very easy. It worked for me very, very quickly. I didn't have to struggle with it at all. And now I don't do any kind of focused meditation. My life is a meditation. I'm meditating all the time. So my life in this world, in this physical virtual reality, is a combination of meditation and interaction in this virtual reality. So it all flows together. It's not, early on, it was kind of either or. I'm either in a meditation state or I'm in this virtual reality, the physical universe, but not both at the same time. It was like one or the other. But then eventually it all blurred together to where there really isn't any line. So life becomes a meditation. You're immersed in that meditative state as well as being able to interact in the physical together. So then you just live in a space that has a larger decision space. There's more choices. You get all the information from both channels, and you, like I say, the intuitive part and the intellect part just work together. So it's just a different life. So I don't actually formally meditate at all anymore, but I'm meditating all the time. It's just more or less. You can put more or less effort or focus into one thing or another. So it's just, life's like that. So when you ask me a question, I may also be pulling data out of your database so I can better understand your question. I might be also thinking about how other people who might listen to this, how they might take the question and how they would, what it might mean to them. And then I may come up with the answers or the way I'm going to answer that question in such a way that it does the most good. And I'm doing all of that with stuff that's here and with stuff that's coming out of those databases that are all intuitive, all at the same time. So you kind of notice me sometimes. My eyes will shut and it looks like I kind of slip off for a few seconds, and then I come back. I'm both basically parallel processing both at the same time, and that's pretty normal. It's not a hard thing to do. It just, when you've been doing this as long as I have, it'll just come naturally.
Holy crap! Yeah, when you were doing that, I was like, wow, he's in the meditation, like I was like, yeah, but yeah, that's the thing that I'm trying to understand. Oh yeah, one of the understanding of the astral projection, because I often hear you talk about outer body, and I interview Robert Bruce. Ever since when I was little, I had this weird. It was out of body for, I don't know why it was there, but I remember when I was sleeping on the couch, and I said in the interview, not sitting but sleeping, I was sleeping, and I felt like my body was paralyzed, right?
Hmm.
And so I don't know if it felt like I was waking up, so I couldn't. I tried to yell for my family or my mom, but I felt like I was out of my body. And then I turned over, like we have like a ledge, right? And there was this bloody skull and told me to wake up. And that was the creepiest, scariest moments of my life. And I tried to close my eyes or whatever I was trying to do, and it tell me wake up again, close, wake up. And then something I don't know if I astral projected. I astral projected out of my body and elbowed the bloody skull, and I stopped having like the thing, and it was scary. And I had a astral. I've been trying because ever since that I was spiritually awakened, whatever you want to call it. I've been trying to, because I watched some YouTube videos on astral projection, and I've been trying to astral project, and there was this weird, because I feel like when you're in inner, was it meditation, you can go out of body. I've been trying to do that. So when I was sleeping on like my bed, or it's not actually a bed, it's like a futon, but it's still. And that day, I finally went out of my body, and then there's just I felt like I was floating, and I tried to I saw my body on the bed, and then I was uh floating, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. I've been trying to do this for a long time. And so I went out to my room, and I went to the bathroom mirror, and I tried to go down, but then I guess I got scared, and I went back into my body. So why did astral projection? That's what I'm curious about, or out of body.
So you want to know what it is, how it happens, and what it means?
Well, yeah, to you, yes. To like, why did you go into this? Did you were curious about it, or it happened to you?
Well, it came to me when I was a child, when I was maybe 5 and 6.
Hmm.
I always had non-physical entities that I chatted with, and
Oh,
some came and they got me out of body, and then they taught me how to go out of body on my own. So I did a lot of out of body as a young kid. Then that stopped when I was probably 7 or 8, and I got back into it when I was in my 20s, late 20s, I guess, mid 20s to late 20s, when I started working with Bob Monroe at what was then Whistlefield Farm, before there was such a thing as the Monroe Institute. Bob Monroe wrote the book Journeys Out of the Body, and then Far Journeys and Ultimate Journey. He wrote 3 books about out of body. Matter of fact, I think out of body was his term for it, which is unfortunate because there's nothing in your body, your consciousness. And all you need to do is tap a different data stream, and then you're out of body. You just let go of all the sense data, which you're no longer attached to your sense data, then basically you're no longer operating a body. And then you are just consciousness, and you can log on to whatever or connect to whatever other data stream that you want to, and then that's your new reality. So when you went out of body, you got a different data stream, and that data stream showed you floating above. You could look down at your body, you could kind of move around in your house. I don't know if you attempted or not, but you could slide right through walls and up through the roof, and you would have been completely mobile to go and do. And if you wanted to, or you wanted to go some other part of the world, all you'd have to do is intend it, and you'd be there. So if you had relatives in Japan or China or Korea or someplace, all you'd have to do is think about it, and there you'd be. You'd be right there. So that's what they call out of body. There's really nothing that's in your body that gets out of your body. That's just metaphorical. It doesn't exist like that. It's your consciousness, and you let go of one data stream and you pick up another data stream. It's the data stream you get has to do with your intent, what you want, where you intend to go, what you want to experience, what you want to learn. So it's just another reality frame in which you get to make choices. And the dream reality is another one of those. So when you're in your dream reality, that's just another virtual reality. So the only thing that's fundamental is consciousness. Everything else that's experiential, which means you can have experience there, is a virtual reality. So your dream reality is a virtual reality, and your out of body is a virtual reality. Transition reality, when you die before you end up going someplace else, that's another virtual reality. those games, like the dream and the out of body, tend to be, for the most part, single player games. It's just you and the computer, and there may be some NPC, non-player characters, that the computer puts in it with you, but mostly they're single player games. Not always, but most of the time. Whereas this reality that we're in here, that we call the physical universe, that's a multiplayer game. We interact with other people all the time, not just NPCs, but other players are here. So that's other realities are easy to get to. When I was first at Bob Monroe's, I did the same sort of thing, the classical out of body, where you kind of float up out of your body, you turn around and looking at yourself lying in a bed, and then you up through the roof and go off and go do something. But eventually I realized all of that was totally unnecessary. You're not in your body. All you have to do is just let the sense data go, attach to another data stream, and you're there. It takes maybe 1/10 of a second. So you can get into that state just as fast as you can snap your fingers. It's easy to do. And then you can get into it partially. You can be, say, 50% there and 50% here, or 30% there and 70% here. And those fractions can vary very quickly. So you just put as much focus into either one that you need, and you can be in multiple reality frames simultaneously. It doesn't take long, and you don't have to, float up and turn around and see your body, all that stuff. You can if you want to, if that's what you want to do, you can do it, but there's just no point in it. So eventually you just let all that go and figure there's no point in that. You just, take a couple of 1/10 of a second and you're there. And then you can do what you want, and you can still be doing stuff here too if you want, or you can sit in a chair or lie down and then you're not doing anything here. You can be 100% there. Or you can be walking in a park and you can be, 30% here and 70% in some other reality frame. It just becomes completely available to you, and there's not a lot of process involved in it. We need all that process because we believe there must be this big process. And the reason it's so hard for us is because we believe it has to be hard. There's this thing of being awake in another reality and then getting across that barrier. And we make that very difficult because it seems like it ought to be difficult. And it's not really. It's just a matter of intention and a little bit of practice. And you realize that you're always out of your body, your consciousness. You don't live in your body. All you do is make its choices, just like you do for your elf in World of Warcraft.
I mean, but the dream though, that's why I think back when I was like really depressed, I enjoy the like you're right. There's like really another reality, but I enjoy that reality than more the corporeal state that we live in, because since I broke up with my ex, all I can see is like things just so cool. Like I would be flying like Superman, or become like, I don't know if you know Power Ranger, all these superheroes like Spider-Man climbing. I can, like, they're so cool. And then they have lucid dreaming, like all these realities, and also Inception, right? Holy crap! Like it's so interesting. Like you can mold it, or you can dream. I remember, I never told this to my audience. When I was little, I always, before the night I go to sleep, I dream of a world like where, because I'm into martial arts, right? Kung Fu and stuff like that ever since I was little. And then I attract these events to me. But I would dream of like trying to protect people, fights and stuff like that, because, Kung Fu, stuff like that. And it would be so cool. And, or also romantic love, but it's so cool. Like oh God, I wish I could explain it to people. So, yeah, that's why I love, but the dream also tells something of your nature, because
Yes.
I study a little bit about the dream, and it's often true. Dreams also tell you about your desire, your fear, something about your it's the subconscious mind is bringing up to your dream. It's telling like these character, whatever it's telling you.
That's true. Your dreams are unique in that, when you're here and you make choices, most of that choice making for most people is done at the intellectual level. Their choices are intellectual. And because they're intellectual, they are often motivated by fears and that sort of thing. Fears and beliefs and ego is what motivates those choices. But when you're in a dream, you make all your choices from the being level. So the things you do in that dream are who you really are. Your dream character that's you is a good representation of who you are at the core. That's your being level. Now, if you make a lucid dream, now you get your intellect into it. But until you get your intellect into it in a normal dream, you are at the being level, which is a good thing. It's a good, because those choices now, that's the real you. So if you do things that are wonderful in your dream, then the real you does wonderful things. And if you do things that are horrible in your dreams, well, the real you does horrible things. So that's the neat thing about dreams. And the dream reality is just like this reality, in the sense that the whole point of it, it's another reality for you to make choices in, and by those choices you grow up. So it's just like here, it just has a different rule set. So you can fly, you can teleport, you can do all kinds of other things there because the rule set isn't so tight as it is here. But the reason you go there is the same as your reason for being here. It's just another virtual reality for you to experience in, make choices in, and grow up in.
Mm. When when you talk about when you talk about realities, I feel like there's another, like, for me, even though I want to say it, like, even though people think like there's, back in 2011, it might seem bad to me or to 13, but I felt like it was a good thing. Like, I feel like every time, like, people think it's bad, but it's actually good for your growth. But it's like, I don't know how I say it. It's like it's moving you toward closer to who you really are, or whatever the consciousness is. Because oftentimes when we talk about religion, I think that oftentimes religion separate, uh like, for example, Buddha's teaching talk about that you shouldn't worship him, but you should take his teaching. Oftentimes we worship someone outside of us, which is God, but we are connected. Or when we meditate, or that's what I got from you, right? When we meditate or when we listen to our intuition, we locked in into this virtual reality. But if we're not honed into this us or whatever it is, we lose that sense of self, the who we are. Because most oftentimes religion separate from who we are.
Yeah, well, religion for the most part is belief based, and in as much as it's dogma based, then it's not real useful. But in as much as it's not dogma based, but based on spiritual ideas, then it can be useful. So religion can be useless or useful, depends on what a person takes out of it. You can get all wound up in the dogma, and then you're right and everybody else is wrong, and your religion's the only good one, and you can get on that kind of a path where the dogma is the most important aspect of it. Or you can just forget all about the dogma and not really care about any of that, and just take it as a as a process of learning to become love, which is good. So people can grow within a religious framework, and they can be, they can de-evolve within a religious framework as well. They can evolve, or they can de-evolve. The religion is neither here nor there. It just provides an opportunity for people to make choices, like anything else. So religion is can be a good way to grow up, and it can be a thing that keeps you from growing up. Just depends on what you do with it, and what you make of it, how you approach it, what's important and what's not. Unfortunately, all that dogma and creed and stuff that you learn, that tends to get in the way with actually becoming a spiritual person. You become a religious person, but not a spiritual person, if that's the thing that you connect to in religion.
Well, and also I was gonna ask you another question for Quantum. If if there's like most, because I watch a lot of your interviews, and there was this guy talking about, I don't know if it was Elon Musk in there too, 'Cause the guy interviewing you, he was talking about it no more. If there's a virtual reality and there's multiple experiments, would you go to the? Because I want to talk about parallel reality. Because for me, I come from a background where I'm very like you're yourself right brain. I'm really right brained because I think oftentimes creative people are really right brained and they listen to their intuition.
Hmm.
And I think that that's where my creativity because I feel like the art because I draw art form, martial arts, and trying to make people laugh. It's my ability to do that. It's all form of expression of a creativity, art form, whatever you want to touch based on it. Would you go to those parallel universe?
Well, about parallel universes, I would say, that there are no parallel universes. There's just other virtual realities. Okay, so it's just maybe it's just nomenclature, the way you're thinking of the names, but the idea that there are many worlds or many parallel universes comes really out of physics again, and it was a way that physics could deal with reality and still keep it physical. You have in quantum mechanics, you have things that's called non-local. That means things that don't make sense from a physical viewpoint. And physicists couldn't explain that. So they invented this many worlds theory, where, well, okay, those non-local things take place in some other reality frame that's parallel to this one. And that every time somebody makes a choice in this reality frame, anytime a choice is made, that splits off another universe in which that choice was made rather than some other choice. So then eventually everything happens. Every possible choice is expressed in a parallel universe of some sort. So that's the many worlds theory, and physicists still work on that many worlds theory. But in my estimation, that is just not a good idea. The many worlds and the parallel universes is not a good idea because it's just too hard to implement. It's not that it's impossible. It's that it's very difficult to split off an entire universe every time somebody decides to, blow their nose or not blow their nose, or scratch their head with their left hand or scratch their head with their right hand, or an electron, does a spin up, flips up to a spin down. Every time something happens, requires another universe in which that happened and in which it didn't happen. You see, so the problem is that there's way too many universes have to be created every billionth of a second. There's trillions and trillions and trillions of universes that need to be created, and in each one of those universes they have to explore all their possibilities as well. So it just goes astronomical, and it's just not a good idea because it's a problem that can't be worked. So you don't need all that. You don't need parallel universes. All you need is one virtual reality. Our physical universe, right, is a virtual reality, and there are other virtual realities. There are other universes like ours that seem to be physical like ours because they have tight rule sets, and they exist as well. And it's not connected to ours. It's just like the Sims and the World of Warcraft, two different virtual realities, but they're really not connected. They both have characters. You can log on to both. You can go play both. You can have a character in both, but they're two separate virtual realities. Well, there's separate virtual realities like ours out there. We're not the only virtual reality. Okay, but you have, instead of every possibility is acted out in a parallel universe, in my theory, you just have probability. You look at all the possibilities and the probability associated with all those possibilities, and all of that is possible, but doesn't have to be rendered in a universe. It's just a possibility. And then we make our choices, and our collective choices produce a history. The choices we actually did make. That's the history thread through that database of all the possible things that could have happened and the probability that they might have happened. So you have all that potentiality is still there. Same potentiality that's in the many worlds, where you look at all the possibilities. But instead of having to create zillions and zillions of universes, it just stays as potentiality. It stays as a possibility with a probability. It doesn't have to be fleshed out in a separate universe. And that makes a lot more sense. And all of that is retained. So you have this history database of all the things that could have happened and the probability that they might have. And you have a probable future database of all the things that might happen and the probability that they might. So that takes care of everything. You see, so we've got all the possibilities are there, but they're all not actualized. The only thing that gets actualized are what we actually create by our choices. But the rest are still there, and we can go into those possibilities and look at them and see what all those possibilities were. We can even make changes in them. Say, well, what if I made a change? Instead of doing this, I did that. How would that change the future? How would that change where I am now? Let's say, 40 years ago or 50 years ago, if I'd married Susie instead of Sally, then where would I be now? What would my life be like? Because I had those two girls and I was thinking I might marry either one of them, but I finally picked Sally. But what would have been like if I'd picked Susie? So you can go into that database and go through all the possibilities and their probability, and you can get a real good idea of what that might have been like. It's not what it actually would have been like, because it's all still just probability. It's just what it might have been like, what it most likely would have been like. So you can follow those things out. So all that information is there, and you can go through that information and learn from it. But it doesn't require another, universe for every possibility. It just keeps all the possibilities in terms of their probability in a big database. So it's so much more efficient. Now that can be done easily by a computer, whereas recomputing zillions and zillions of universes takes a huge amount of resources, and to the point that it's just a silly idea. So that's my thought about parallel universes. They don't really exist. But now if you're thinking of all the possibilities that could happen, yes, that does exist. And you can get in those databases and do what if analysis, but they've not really ever been actualized. The only one that's actualized is the one where we make the choices. We decide to marry, Sally instead of Susie. That's the one that gets actualized. But all the rest of the possibilities are still there in the database. So that's the way I see it. I think the parallel universes and the multiple worlds is it's a good try for the scientists trying to figure out a way to get over this fact that physics is telling us that this is an information-based reality, and that allows for everything to play out, but it's just not a practical solution. And there's another solution that has all the same attributes, but not any of the cost. And that's the one I think is more likely to actually be, is the one that makes more sense. But you can still talk about other possibilities, and
Well,
things could be done differently.
but thank you so much for that. It was that was very interesting because I can like pull ideas out of how I can because I didn't want it to write a self-help book, or I wanted it to be different because I got tired of the law of attraction and the self-help stuff. That I'm trying to create something that we all can benefit from, and I wanted to put forth something that is uniquely mine that I can share with the world, so we don't have to suffer. And I was thinking about what was it? What was I thinking about? Crap. Quantum physics, right? When we talk about quantum physics, what does it actually is? What like I study a little bit where they said that the physics is uh it's old now, it's obsolete. Where they study the physical, while the quantum physics is studied. I don't know if I think I'm incorrect. But I'm gonna say like the small stuff. but I read Bruce Lipton, and I saw him on your interview or something. And in his book, I finally took the time to read it. He said that the nature of reality is it's nothing there, and when you change the mind, you change the biology. Now, can you explain what really is quantum physics or
Sure.
mechanics?
Yeah, well, quantum mechanics replaced Newtonian mechanics. Newton had a description of the world, and he had his laws, which turned out not to be laws at all, but only to be true within a certain subset of reality. Quantum physics was more general. It could do all the things that Newton's laws could do, but it also did more. So it was just a more general science. So that's what they mean when they say it replaced the Newtonian physics. It's not that Newtonian physics is wrong. It's just that Newtonian physics only applies to a subset of our reality. It applies to that part of our reality where things are not moving too fast and where they're not too small. But if you get things that are too fast and things that are too small, then that Newtonian physics just doesn't get you right answers. It doesn't work there. But in our everyday space that we live in, out in the macro world that we all spend our time in every day, Newtonian physics still describes how the world works. But if you start traveling, at half the speed of light, or you go down into microscopic particles, then Newtonian physics just doesn't work anymore. And that's because Newtonian physics is just kind of a higher level look at science, where you don't look at the details. By higher level, I mean less detail. So as you get down more into the details of reality, you find that quantum physics is required. Now, all quantum physics is that quantum physics says that there really are no particles. There is no mass. There's only probability distributions. That the world is made up of particles that are only, what we say, potential particles. It's not until you actually make a measurement that you get a particle. Until you make a measurement, until some person makes a measurement, there are no particles. So it's a different way of looking at reality, and it's quantum physics that ended up telling us that this is an information-based reality. So, Newton said this is a mass-based reality. It's mass and it's space, and those are the key things here, and everything else is made up out of that. But quantum mechanics says no, it's not really mass-based; it's information-based. And in order to correctly compute what very tiny things and what very fast things are going to do, you need relativity and quantum mechanics. Relativity does the things that are very fast. Quantum mechanics does the things that are really small. So you need those two. So relativity and quantum mechanics now cover everything that Newton said, because those things will also deal with things, can aggregate that up into a kind of averages, if you will, and then you end up with Newtonian physics. So Newtonian physics is just a special case of relativity and quantum mechanics. So that's kind of what quantum mechanics is. So it looks at particles and says particles exist when you measure them, and until you measure them, they don't really exist. They just have a probability of existing. See, just like my model says, there's probabilities, right? And you get to modify those. So that's the way quantum mechanics works. So in the double slit experiment, if you don't measure that particle at a particular slit, like we talked about earlier, then no measurement's made. And there really are no particles. And because there are no particles, you end up with this diffraction pattern, a wave pattern, because there is this problem of a boundary between photons being chunks of light and optics where light is a wave. So those two aren't allowed. The system doesn't allow there to be a disconnect there. They want a smooth boundary between the particle of light and the lots of particles which make the wave of light. Okay, so that's why the system then has those particles distribute themselves as a diffraction pattern in order to maintain that continuity across that boundary. So that's why it does that. But that's because the measurement at the slit creates the particle. says, we measured a particle here. Now, once you create that particle, it just acts like a particle. So once you measure it, it has to travel in a straight line and hit the screen right behind the slit. But if you don't measure it, it's not really a particle until it actually hits the screen. And then it has to hit the screen in such a way as to give a smooth boundary between particles and waves. So that's kind of what's going on there. So that's quantum mechanics. It deals with small particles as probability, not as massy particles. So it doesn't see the world as made up of massy chunks. It sees the world as made up of probabilities where massy chunks might be. But not until you make a measurement do you actually find a massy chunk. Until that time, it's just possibility and probability. So that's basically what quantum mechanics is all about. And relativity is about two things. Special relativity was about things going fast, and it has a lot of odd things. You know, if you take a thing, whatever it is, take a baseball or anything, and you make it go faster and faster and faster, the faster it goes, the heavier it gets. Okay, it'll get, the mass goes up and up and up, and the smaller it gets in the dimension of its velocity. So if you had a baseball that was round, it would turn and its direction was this way, say going away from me, then in that dimension, it would also be flat. As it approaches the speed of light, it has no depth at all. It's called length contraction. So now it's just this plate that's infinitely thin plate rather than a round sphere. It's still that same size as the baseball, except it's scrunched. So if you had just a line, just a two-dimensional thing, and you made it go very fast, like a pencil, say, that was infinitely thin, the pencil would get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter till at the speed of light it disappear altogether, and it would have an infinite mass and no extension. So that's at a point where the equations blow up and, you know, go to infinity, and nothing really, you know, the math doesn't work anymore at that point. So that's called a singularity. And so it has these things. And also time goes by slower. So if you're on that baseball and you're going faster and faster, time on the baseball starts getting slower and slower. So if that baseball, you know, had a lifetime, let's say it was made of something that would decay in an hour. So the baseball would melt in an hour, you know, it would just kind of dissipate. You know, it gets made out of that stuff that decomposes with time. If it was something like that, well, if it, let's say that ball would decompose if it was sitting on the ground, in an hour, it would just kind of turn to dust. If you made it go close to the speed of light, it could go for years without turning to dust, because the time on that baseball would start to go slower and slower and slower, and it may take 20 years for an hour to accumulate on that ball if it was going fast enough. That's called time dilation. So all of those are the strange things that happen when you go fast. You have all these very odd effects, and of course they're all measured. They're all real. You know, they've measured that. They can take a cesium atom that vibrates. It's usually what they make the digital watches out of. You know, they vibrate real fast, and they can take that and split that cesium in two pieces, and they both have exactly the same frequency, and they can count how many vibrations it makes. They can put one on a fast airplane or in a satellite, let it zip around at high speed, bring it back, and it hasn't, when it comes back, you look at the two of them, and one of them's younger than the other. One of them made, you know, a billion cycles, and the other one only made 800 million cycles. So they didn't, one of them started to vibrate slower because time slows down. So all these things are measurable effects, and those are the effects of special relativity. And then you go to general relativity, and that's all about gravity. And it's just looking at gravity from another viewpoint. You know, the Newton looked at gravity as all masses attract. So if this is a mass and that's a mass, there's a force between them that attracts them. And that force is equal to a constant times mass 1 times mass 2 divided by the square of the distance between them. And that's the force that they're pulled together with. All right, that is Newton's idea of gravity. Einstein's idea of gravity is that space is like a trampoline. Space is like as a fabric, is a stretchy fabric. Okay, and if you put something heavy on a trampoline, it'll kind of sink, right? So if you take a bowling ball, a 10-pound bowling ball, and sit in the middle of a trampoline, then that part of the trampoline will sag, and all the other parts will go into it. And that's the reason that the masses attract, because if you put another mass on that trampoline, it'll roll downhill to hit, to get to the first mass. So gravity then becomes a function of the geometry of space rather than that masses attract. It's just a different viewpoint of how gravity works. And it turns out to be a little more general model if you look at it in that as a geometric solution rather than just a distance between spheres. 1 over the m1, m2 over r square. So that's really what relativity and quantum mechanics are. So quantum mechanics is a big deal because it doesn't see our physical world as a physical world. It sees it as a probabilistic world. Now, physicists try very hard to maintain the physical world. So they come up with a lot of beliefs that let them do quantum mechanics and still try to believe there's a physical world, but it doesn't really work very well. Quantum mechanics basically says there is no physical world. There is nothing objective. Matter of fact, we just had another quantum mechanics experiment about 2 weeks ago. New experiment was done. It was an old thought experiment done by Wigner, who was one of the original quantum mechanics gurus. And the result of that was reality is not objective. Reality is subjective, which is what we know from consciousness, right? Our reality is subjective because it's information. Everybody has their own information. So if it's informational, that's easy to understand. If it's not, if it's really mass, then that's impossible to understand, because if it's mass, then it's objective, you see. So that's why quantum mechanics keeps coming up. Bruce Lipton talks about it. I talk about it some. It keeps coming up because that's the part of science that has demonstrated that our reality is information-based, not material-based. So that's why you see it. And Bruce says, yes, this is just this body is just data. It's just information. And you can change that. You can modify future probability with your intent. So if you have enough focus, enough clarity, and comes from the being level, you can modify your physical body. You can heal it. You can, do different things to it. You can, I don't know, you can just modify the way it is. And the more uncertainty there is, the easier it is to modify. So let's say if you were 5 years old and you really wanted to be blonde instead of have black hair because you thought blonde was really cool, and you started working real hard on, I want to be a blonde, and you put that in there, you might have ended up blonde, which would have been really strange coming from your ethnic background. You might have been blonde, because then there might have been some uncertainty. But given your parents and the rest of it and your genetics, probably that uncertainty was small, so it would have been hard to do. But let's say that you had some intermarriage with people who are blonde, with Norwegians or something back in your family history at some time, then that gene would have been there. Even though it was maybe only 1 in 1,000 that gene would pop up, but still that gene would have been there, and then you would have had a chance to modify future probability and come out blonde rather than with dark hair. So you see, it depends on the probability. You can modify things. You can modify probability. You can't force you can't force reality to give you what you want, but you can modify probability to make it more or less likely. You still may not get it, even if you work hard at it. You may not get it. There may just not be enough uncertainty for you to work with.
Interesting. But thank you so much for that. Like, I was so interested, like, because you give me an image. I wanted to ask you, have you watched Interstellar?
Sounds familiar. May have.
It's it's a movie where the whole planet, it's about, I forgot what it was, but the planet, it's decaying, or something happened to the Earth, and they're trying to find life out of the universe, and they go into a wormhole, and then they go into this like worlds where it's almost like us. But you were talking about how time speed up, and one would be like would be older than the other, and that
Hmm.
came up because there was talking about where there was this, they were in this spaceship, and then they already went out of the wormhole, and they're going to this planet. It's a water world, and they went in there, and then they came back because there was a delay on the planet. Something happened, and it was like it took them. They came back 20. Well, I'm not correct. 20 or whatever they aged. The guy in the spaceship aged while waiting for them. But over there, they're like the time just normal to them. But
Yeah.
out there,
Well, yeah. In physics, when special relativity first came up, they called that the twin paradox. Whereas you can have twins who are exactly the same age, and one of them gets in a rocket ship and goes at 80% the speed of light for 10 years, and turns around and goes 80% the speed of light 10 years back. And when he gets out of the rocket ship, he's a lot younger than his twin. His twin may be, very old. Well, I guess 80 years, a twin would be really old, but you could do this such that the twin would be much, much older. The one that stayed behind is much, much older than the one that went fast. So, and again, they've tested that, not with twins, but with cesium clocks and other things. They've tested that, and indeed that does work that way. Now, wormholes are still a concoction of imagination. They're not so much solid physics as they are a conjecture, as a possibility. But that's yet to be seen if there are such things. But basically, when they make movies like that, they try to stay in the bounds of relativity and quantum theory. Just lends credibility. But then they make stuff up like wormholes to make the more exciting.
well, when you say I turn blind, I mean there was this Japanese cartoon. I don't know if you know it. It's called Dragon Ball Z. It's one of my favorite anime of all time. And there's this alien. Um, his name is Son Goku, which represent the Monkey King from the Sun Wukong in China. It's a novel, and where this being it went to Earth. It doesn't discover who he is yet, and then he turned into this super powerful. As they engage in fighting, they become more powerful because it's in them. And there's this thing where they call it the legendary Super Saiyan, where they have black hair. This character have black hair. When they turn to this super being, they turn blonde. And so it's yeah, uh, one of my favorite things, because I always portray myself as a hero. Well, in my mind, because when I watch like martial art or kung fu movies, right? There's this kung fu master. I try to, most people view martial arts as violent, and my favorite hero is Jackie Chan, and they call it Wong Fei Hong, right? Where they have morals and principles. They use martial arts to protect people. And when I was little, I tried to embody that, not only for self-defense, but to protect people when needed to be, right? And so I embodied that. That's because I feel like all these arts, all because I interview vastly many different people because I try to understand as a whole, right? Everything as a whole is the same. What are a martial artist? What are people, physicists, or astral projections, law of attraction, spirituality? They're as a core being. I noticed that they're the same. Like they have an innate ability to touch within themselves. Um, this it's a theme that I keep seeing,
Mhm.
that people generally do have an awareness, but they've forgotten. But yeah, what is your superpower? What would you like to have a superpower?
Oh, I have everything that I want, everything that I need. I already have it. I can't think of anything that I would change. Um,
Do when you just say that, do you, when it comes to creating the reality that you want, do you accept it to be true and you know that it's gonna come? What is that? Like you just say that.
Well, yes, when you, if you are, if you're positive and you use your intent in a positive way, then you create a very positive reality for yourself. So you do create your own reality, but that's, you don't create it completely. You see, you're here with other beings. You and I are together in this reality, and the choices that I make affect the choices that you make. We're interactive. And I can't control the choices that you make, and you can't control the choices I make. So we just have to deal with each other. I have to deal with the things that you do. You have to deal with the things that I do. You see, it's just the way it is. So that's the way it is for all the people. All the people on this planet, they're all making choices, and their choices affect other people. And there's nothing you can do about that. They have free will, so you cannot control your reality completely. But there are three ways in which you can modify your reality. One we talked about, which is that you can modify future probability. Okay, that's one way you can change your reality. Another one is you can change your reality by the way you interact with people. For instance, if you're really a user of people and you're very arrogant, whatever, then people will react to you differently than if you're kind and caring. So you will change how other people react to you. So you modify your reality because your reality modifies in reaction to yourself. You change your reality just by being who you are. And the third thing is that you create your reality by the way you interpret the data. So you get this data stream and you interpret that data, and your interpretation is your reality. But your interpretation is colored by all sorts of things. Your interpretation reflects your fears, it reflects your needs, it reflects your wants, it reflects your beliefs, it reflects your knowledge, your love, it reflects all of your experience. And based on that experience, that's how you interpret the data. So that creates your own reality. So those are the three ways that you create the reality that you live in. But the way you can't control the reality you live in is the fact that it's a multiplayer game, and everybody in the game has free will, and they make free choices, and we just have to deal with those free choices that they make. So
Thank you.
that's, yeah, that's kind of, you don't get to make your reality completely. Matter of fact, once you get to the point where you can modify future probability rather strongly and consistently, you generally stop modifying it at all. Once you can heal people very consistently and very effectively, you generally stop healing people. When you get the ability to do these things in a strong way, you tend to stop doing them. And the reason for that is that everything, you realize that everything is there for a reason. People have ill health and have their problems for a reason. Mostly they've created that out of their own negativity. They've created that dysfunction and that ill health. And it's just on their path to grow up. That's part of their feedback from the life they're living and the choices that they've made. And you don't really have to step in and change anything. It's just the way it is. So that's one thing. You realize that everything is okay the way it is. Secondly, you realize that by changing things, you begin to put yourself in an artificial bubble. You create a bubble reality around yourself. So every time, let's say, every time you get up, you start to program a parking space for when you get to work. So you never have to struggle for find a parking spot at work. You just always have one appears there because you can set that up with your intent. And, you never catch a cold, you don't get ill, you don't get surprised by anything. You always know what's coming. So you start to live in a bubble that's an artificial world that you create for yourself out of your own control. And that is counterproductive. You don't want to live in the bubble. The way we grow up, the way we evolve is stuff happens and we get to deal with it. And by the choices that we deal with it, that's what makes us grow up or not. So if you put yourself in this bubble, and live in a sterile environment where you control most of what happens, you've just taken yourself out of the situation where you can grow and where you can evolve. And you probably end up de-evolving. You probably end up creating more ego, creating more arrogance than not. So those who, when you're first learning these paranormal things, you're really excited about them and you do it a whole lot and you practice and you practice and you get better and better at it. But the further you go, the less and less you practice, the less and less you do, and pretty soon you don't do any of it at all, unless there's just special occasions, special times when you need to stretch out and help somebody to understand them better or whatever. Then you do, you tap into it just naturally then. But just doing it because you can do it, no, you just let it go. You let life happen however it does and you deal with it. That's how you learn. That's what keeps you on your toes. So you don't want to modify your reality to the point that you live in a sterile bubble where everything comes out the way you've intended it to come out. That's not really a good way to live your life. So yes, you can modify your physiology. Most of the people who take drugs like Prozac, drugs that increase serotonin, people who are depressed take these drugs. There's a whole family of them, probably 10 or 20 drugs, but they all do the same thing. They're serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So serotonin is a component to your nervous system that allows your brain and your nervous system to communicate better. And if you're negative and have negative thoughts, if you're feeling inadequate, if you're feeling insecure, then those feelings start to modify your physiology, your body, such that it produces less and less serotonin. So just being negative will cause you to produce less serotonin, which makes you more depressed, which makes you more negative, which makes you more depressed, and it just tends to, go in a downward spiral. You can take medicine that will increase that serotonin, and then that lets you get by without growing up any. But if you were to grow up and let go of some of those fears, let go of that inadequacy and that insecurity, your serotonin would start to increase on it by itself. So you see, you can heal. That's what Bruce Lipton is saying. You can heal things like depression, if it's a serotonin issue, just by changing your biology, changing your brain chemistry. You're not stuck with those things. Bruce Lipton always says, you're not at the mercy of your genetics. Your genetics just kind of broadly gives you boundaries, but there's a lot that you can do inside of those boundaries that you can affect with your mind. You're not a slave of your genetics. You can master that. You can change your physical body. Like I said, you can change your brain chemistry. You can change these things with attitude, with intent. So we affect ourselves all the time. So people who are unhappy and miserable and depressed, they're that way generally because they're negative. They have a lot of fear. They're negative because they have a lot of fear. The fear creates ego and the fear creates belief. So you get a lot of ego, a lot of belief and negativity, and then you start changing your body. Your body starts to change to support that negative attitude, which means your serotonin starts to dry up. Your brain chemistry changes. All sorts of things, hormone secretions, everything changes to recondition or to remake your body in that negative mode, in that unhappy mode. So now you've got not only to deal with your fears, but your body is also changed to support a fearful attitude. So you kind of dig a hole for yourself that way. Now you have to overcome those fears, get positive, so that your body can change its chemistry. But you've got two things to overcome now. One's the fear, and one's biochemistry that's supporting a negative attitude. So those are so you can help yourself and you can hurt yourself. You can make things easier for yourself or harder for yourself based on your attitude and your intent and what you're thinking. So consciousness is the key thing. That intent is the prime mover. and it can affect almost everything else if there is enough uncertainty about that other thing. So the amount of serotonin you have, well, that's uncertain at any particular moment because it comes and goes. You have systems that make it and systems that get rid of it. And those can change slightly within the margins of uncertainty. Then you can change them slightly a little more and slightly a little more to where you can crank it up to be entirely different or deplete it, either way. So people are pretty much the way they are because of the choices they've made. And to take that away from them means that you're taking away their symptoms so that they can continue on with their bad behavior. You see, they're not going to learn anything. So you have to look at it not from just this lifetime, but from a multiple lifetime perspective. That this is just one chapter in a very long book, this lifetime, this existence, this particular avatar, just one chapter in a book. So you don't want to necessarily change things, mess in somebody else's lesson plan. Maybe that would make them feel better, make their symptoms go away, but it doesn't really help them that much. Now, there are exceptions to this. This isn't, I'm not saying that this is always this way, but a large part of your life is better left just to happen the way it happens. Special cases, you can do other things. Special times, special circumstances, particularly where people's illnesses are not a factor of their own creation, but something else. Some just bad luck. They just happen to be born in a certain way. Now those, then, if there's enough uncertainty, are the easiest ones to fix. The hardest ones to fix are where people have created the problem themselves. And they're easier to fix because, that's something that is good to fix. Now there's a place where you do heal people because that's not their own creation. It's just something that happened to them. So there's times to heal, there's times to let things be, and for the most part, letting things be is the situation that you're in most often.
Thank you so much for that. That's when you say like that. I hope that can bring awareness to that. And what's your message when you write your big toe? What is it like? Why did you write the book, and what's your message to the audience?
Well, the message was understand who you are, why you are, and what you are. And if you understand those things, now you have a chance of doing much better playing that game. See, we're in this trainer, right? This entropy reduction trainer. And if we're all just wandering around clueless on the playing field, we have no idea what the game is, then it's not likely we're going to do very well at it. It's like if you're in World of Warcraft and have no idea how to play your character, you probably, your lizard guy fall in a stream and probably drown because you don't know that you have to point his head up in order to make him come up to the surface, So because you don't know that, you don't think about it, and your guy falls in the water and he drowns, So you've been in the game for 30 seconds and your character's dead already, just because you're too inept to know what you're doing. Well, that's the way it is in our life. If you're too inept to know what you're doing, you don't have any clue what this game's about, what life's about, what your mission here is, what the point and purpose of your life, then you're just wandering around clueless on the playing field, not making much progress. So the book was basically written to help people see a bigger picture in which their life fits into it. Not only their objective life, but their subjective life, their experiences, like your experiences, your out-of-body experiences, your experiences in the right brain world with your intuition. All those experiences in that subjective world just fit right into that model. And you can see, oh yeah, that's how all these things fit together. Okay, that's how the martial arts and the out-of-body and all these things fit together within this one structure, and they all make sense. So it was to give people that ability to have a structure in which their life made sense, and then encourage them to create their own big toe in such a way that it's their model. Okay, what does their experience tell them about the world? And my model is kind of a go by. It's just something to refer to if it works and throw away if it doesn't work. but it gives people at least a structure in which they can take all the experiences in their life and see what they mean, how it affected them. All right, you have that experience where people told you you were dumb and worthless. And what did that do to your life? Well, it created fears. It created fears that you were dumb and useless. And as you had those fears, they affected all the choices that you made. And you made different choices because of you have that belief, because of that fear. And then you grew up and you realized, hey, I'm not dumb and useless. That's just not true. I don't accept that. And then you maybe got rid of that fear. And then you change your choices. Your entropy goes down. You grow up a little bit. You start seeing what's important. Well, what's important is caring about other people, not just about me, but doing something useful for others, being part of the solution, not part of the problem. And you start to see that. Well, now your entropy just went down and you're growing up a little bit, you see? So things happen. They all kind of pull together. All your experiences come together to make a life and to make progress and to make sense of that. So within my model, I wrote it so that you could see how all those things actually make sense, that it's the fear, that things that in your life create fears. Those fears create problems for you. You make poor choices based on that fear, and how to get rid of that fear. And when you get rid of that fear, you feel so much lighter and so much better. And you go from just being, oh, woe is me and poor me, self-pity, to what can I do to help others? How can I be part of the solution? You kind of change your attitude altogether. Well, that's in the process of growing up. And this model explains all that and puts it in context of a bigger picture of why you're here, your purpose, what it all means, what is this thing called out of body, and why can you use your intent to create, to modify future probability, and why does the placebo effect work, and why does quantum mechanics, think particles are just probability distributions? Well, it's because they are probability distributions. This is a probabilistic reality. That's exactly what they are. That's why that works. So it helps you understand everything in the objective world of science and in the subjective world of your own experience. And you can see the structure and how it all comes together. Like you said, all this stuff is really showing that it's all connected. The martial arts you do isn't just about chopping people with your hands. It's about using your intent, using your focus, understanding you at the core level, controlling your intent and your focus and your clarity, getting all those extraneous thoughts out of your mind and being intuitive and being one with the situation, one with your opponent, one with your environment, so that you are connected in an intuitive way. Because if you had to do everything from your intellect, you'd be horrible at it. You'd have to think everything. You wouldn't be any good at it, right? If you say, okay, now what is my opponent going to do? Okay, I see he just moved his foot. Well, that means he's going to do this. If you got to think about it, you're going to be terrible. You have to get to the point that it's all coming out of your being level. It has to be intuitive. You have to be connected to those databases where you just know what the right move is next. It's intuitive. And then you can get good at it. You can use your mind to modify things. You can use your mind to confuse your opponent, make your opponent, less sure, or create instabilities in his thinking. And there's all sorts of things that you can do. So it's really a mental game more than a physical game. Yes, you need a physical body to execute it, but the physical body and its training isn't the key ingredient. The key ingredient is your intent. It's your consciousness. It's getting rid of the intellect and getting into your intuitive space. That's why you like martial arts, because it gets into your intuitive space, and that's kind of where you live anyway, is in your intuitive space. People who live out of their intellects have trouble with things like martial arts, because all they can do is follow directions. They can't really blend into the moment and into the action to where they just know what the right move is at the right time without having to think about it. So yes, it all fits together. All the things in the world, all of your experiences all come together and can be understood under just one basic model. But if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. So you have to go experience these things. You can't not experience them. So I encourage everybody to go experience, learn how to meditate, get into your head, get acquainted with your intuitive self. Develop that intuitive self to where you can depend on it, to where you can become one with things. You can integrate yourself with your environment, with your things, with other people. You can get connected. You say that's what your martial arts teaches you, but it teaches you that only in one perspective. You can do this in many different perspectives. So that's the point of writing the books, to give people a model that they can use to make their own model based on their own experience. And of course, the basic line, the most important thing in the books is that love is the answer. That's where we're going. Becoming love, caring about other people. That's the key thing, getting rid of that fear and becoming whole again, and caring and being compassionate, being cooperative. That's what it's all about. And when we get there, this world will be a very happy, positive place. And everybody will have the maximum amount of free will to do exactly what they want. Because what they want is going to be part of the solution. That's what they'll want.
Well, thank you so much for writing the book, and you're very good at with people. I can tell just by you directing with me. And thank you so much for doing what you do to be able to uplift, humanity or consciousness. Like, why do you do it for people? What make you do it for people?
Well, again, you need to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. If you just if you learn things and grow up and get a real big picture, and then you just sit in your cave someplace and think big thoughts, well, that's, it's nice, but if you actually can get out there and help somebody, that's a lot nicer. So the whole point of growing up is to make yourself more useful to others, not so that you can feel like you're better than others. It's a matter of how can I help? So that's the point. So it's all about others. So if people, you hear about people being enlightened, say, "Oh, I'm enlightened and I'm out of here. I'm not coming back to this place anymore. It's my last incarnation, and I've learned it all. Now I'm moving on to a better place." Well, people who say they're enlightened, the fact that they say it is most certainly good proof that they are not. Because if they really were enlightened, they wouldn't be telling other people that they were enlightened. And it wouldn't be about them, and it wouldn't be about them escaping. It would be about how could they help more? What could they do? How could they be part of the solution here? Not, well, I want to get out of this place. This place sucks. As soon as I can get out of here, the better. That's all self-centered stuff. That's not love stuff and giving stuff. So once you grow up, what you want to do is be more helpful, be more useful. That's what it's all about. 1, 2, 3. Good. We've gone 2.5 hours. This has been long. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got other things I got to do. I got another meeting coming up, so I guess go ahead, do one more, and then I'll have to go.
Yeah. What does success look like to you?
Success for me would be to help every human on this planet grow up. That we as a species could grow up and become more caring and more forgiving and more compassionate. And if that happened, then all the rest of our problems would fix themselves. All the problems we have with people who use us and manipulate us and whatever, all the problems in government and with corporations and with everything else, people taking advantage of the environment, all of that stuff would just go away on its own. So success would be if I can plant seeds that someday, maybe decades, maybe centuries, maybe millennia, who knows, but if I can plant seeds that help this process of human evolution of consciousness to the point that we can interact with other kind of consciousness, all the critters and animals, they're conscious just like we are. They're doing about the same thing we are, but we can be more creative and more destructive than the rest. So we have a particular responsibility. And if we take that responsibility and grow ourselves up, then I will have been a great success. So that's how I define success, is based on how much I'm actually able to help humans evolve the quality of their consciousness in the future, near or far future. So that's it. That's my goal. That's why I'm here. That's why I do talks. That's why I write books. That's why I travel around a lot.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and I hope that you continue doing amazing things for others as you have done for me, and hopefully this video will help other people too. Thank
I
you.
hope so.
No, still too. Thank you.
You're
Bye.
welcome. So long. Oh, I'll
Cool.
give you this video. When I get this video, I'll get it copied, and I'll give you an email and show you where you can pick it up.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.